Thank you for joining me in my garden today. I'm Liz Davey, and you're watching A Walk in the Garden on Norfolk Community Cable Television, NCTV. It's a breezy day in April, and the temperatures are quite warm. It's partly cloudy, the sun keeps coming in and out, and I've been very busy trying to get the garden cleaned up. We've had some warm weather that has brought out a lot of blooms, and the plants are just springing out of the ground. It seems, with the warmth, and we had a little rain last week after several weeks of very dry weather. It was welcome rain, and we're hoping to get a little more later this week. I'm in my herb garden, and it's time to start picking at least one of the herbs, and that would be chives. And I'm going to use the chives in something that I cook today, later on in the show. It's also time to do a little planting, but not too much. Many of the herbs that are in my garden are perennials, but I do plant a few annuals or biennials, and so I'm going to put in some parsley. Parsley is relatively hardy, and this has been growing in my little shed greenhouse, and so I can put that into the soil now, and it should be all right. As you can see, it's got some nice roots, and we'll dig a little hole for it and just put it in. Other things that you can plant right now would include sage and thyme, but hold up on things like dill and basil. Those are very tender, and we could still get a frost until about the middle of May. So I would definitely wait on those until later. Of course, when you plant something, you always need to water it in. And it came out a little faster than I thought it would. But it will be fine. So we water it in and make sure that it stays watered until the roots spread out. Again, I've already been picking chives. The other thing that I can pick now is sorrel. Sorrel is best. It's a very astringent, acidic herb, and it makes a great sauce for salmon. And there are other recipes you can use it. It's a French herb. Sorrel soup is a French soup, and it is ready to be picked lightly now. It will keep growing, but it's at its best when it's young and tender. I have a little thyme that's up, lemon balm, garlic chives, and this big southernwood. Oregano is up. Any of these that are up, you can plant now. And your nursery would be able to tell you what's extremely tender. They're the ones that are inside. Anything that is outside is probably okay to plant. This is a southernwood, and this gets pruned in the spring once it starts growing. And I'm not going to take the whole thing off right now, but you can see what I'm doing. I'm just cutting it way back. And it'll grow again. This is one that I use primarily as an insect repellent herb. Put it in my greenhouse to help keep the mice out. I can even take some of these stems, make a little bundle and hang out there, and that will help deter the mice that like to eat my seedlings. But this one gets cut back now, as does lavender. And I have a lavender right over here. And you can see a little bit of green coming out on it. But this can be cut back just a bit. These are somewhat tender perennials. You can clean up the leaves that blow in too. And we're just basically neatening them up. And it will be putting on. Actually, pruning stimulates growth in these types of plants. They aren't pruned in the fall. If you prune lavender in the fall, it is not happy about it, and you may lose it. But by pruning out some of the oldest stems, you'll stimulate the growth of new ones. So I have some lavender in my flower garden as well, and that will also get pruned as we go along. So the biggest job was just cleaning the leaves off the garden, and as you can see, more keep blowing in. So that's kind of a perpetual job. We put a little fertilizer down. If you have compost, it's always good to add. Herbs tend to like drier conditions and soil that isn't extremely rich. So I don't go about fertilizing it too heavily. Just a little is enough. You do, however, want to make sure to keep the herbs moist. And if we're going to have a dry summer, that is going to be the biggest problem you have with herbs. They do like a little moisture. Many of them are Mediterranean in nature, so think of that climate and you'll have the idea. Now let's move over to the perennial garden. I'm here in the perennial garden and I've raked this out lightly. There are still a few leaves and I don't mind a few leaves that get left. And it's really a riot of bloom with a lot of daffodils. Each year I plant a few more bulbs and they are really enjoyable right now. This is kind of the peak season and they seem to all come at once. Daffodils come in early, mid, and late season, but somehow in New England they seem to all get kind of mixed together and they all tend to come on pretty much the same time. Some of them are a little later than others, but I don't really notice a whole lot of difference in season except for a very few varieties. Right now we're having tulips that are starting, hyacinths, and your daffodils and hyacinths are pretty much safe from the critters. They don't like them, which is why I do like them. And one of the things that I need to do with tulips is constantly deer spray them. I have quite a few tulips in here. I got out early this year and it looks like I'll have some blooms on the tulips. Some of them are already in bloom. We'll see those a little later on. And others are in bud and will be out soon. One of the things you can do after the daffodils bloom is to take off the old blooms. And I just cut them back right here, right at the top. It makes the plant look neater, and it also keeps the bulb from going to seed. This means that as the foliage ripens, it will feed the bulb, not the seed. And we want the bulbs to expand so that we'll have nice bloom next year. And so these get cut off as they finish blooming, and it looks a lot better too. Now I don't braid the daffodils or do anything with them. They really need to sit out in the sun and brown down naturally. This can be kind of a problem because they look a little unsightly later on. But hopefully some of the other perennials around them will grow up and cover the browning foliage. And ultimately it will just kind of lay down and be out of sight, or at least a little out of sight. But if you want good daffodils, you really need to let that foliage brown on its own. The same with tulips and all of the spring bulbs that you put in. They need that time in the sun and water and air to form a healthy bulb to provide blooms for next year. So I am seen with deer spray going around the garden with the tulips and also with the emerging hostas in the back. They will also get a lot of deer spray. I buy the large bottle of concentrate and mix it every year. Now I'm going to move down for roses. We have a nice little primrose right here that's coming into bloom as well. This is a double primrose, and it is expanding to the point where I probably can divide it after it finishes blooming and put a little more someplace else, or maybe just expand the area where it is. Again, there are many, many daffodils. This is a different one. It has a little frilly cup frilly orange cup. The catalogs are starting to come out now, and if you want bulbs to plant next fall, the time to order is early so that you get the ones you want. Also, I have always found it hard to know where to put new bulbs. So I'm trying something this year that's a little different. And what I've done is I've taken some rocks, we have plenty of those, and I've labeled them. I've put a T for tulip, and tulip would be nice over here. And I'm going to put these rocks in my garden so that hopefully they'll stay, and I'll know next spring where I want to plant more things. Another daffodil back here would be nice. Maybe a white one. And I also have one for a hyacinth with an H on it. So I've just basically put yellow and red. And I think I put a purple for the hyacinth in here someplace. Yeah, or a C for crocus. So a bunch of crocuses. The crocuses have already gone by, but I'd like a few more here. So I'm going to just put my rock there. Hopefully this will guide me next fall when it's bulb planting time. You know where you want them now, but when everything else grows up, it's really difficult to see where they ought to be. And this, I hope, will help. I'm using rose fertilizer, rose tone, on the roses. I've already pruned the roses for the most part. There's always a few spots that need a little more. Like an old bloom right here or here. But I've pruned them, and you can see the foliage has come out. And I'm going to spread the rose fertilizer around it. And we have bulbs around it, but I'm just going to go right through those. And if the soil was not damp, I would also water it in. Now, this is the fertilizer in April. The rose will bloom probably in May or June, have a full flush of bloom. And after that, once it's finished with its first bloom flush, we'll fertilize it again. And that will give us blooms into fall. I'm going to move over this way. And I have a peony right here that's coming up, and I have already fertilized that. And again, I use the rose tone on it. And you can just see the shoots coming up. And it's important to put a support on it early. Peonies like to flop, and so it's important before they get really tall and they start coming up, they move along pretty fast. So you want to get the support on it fairly soon, even though it shows. And I use old tomato cages that I've cut in pieces. The other thing is sometimes peonies have fungal problems. They will have black foliage or a lot of mildew. And for that I can spray it with a product called Serenade, which is a fungicide. It's an organic fungicide. And about every 2 weeks, just give them a spritz if you've had trouble. If you haven't had any trouble, don't worry until you do. But that's one way to keep it in check. Here's another lavender that will need to be pruned. We have a lot of dry, dead foliage on this one. We're hopeful that it will come back with some pruning. If you have plants that look dead right now, give them a little time. Some plants take a little longer to leaf out than others. So just don't be too quick to pull them out of the ground if they aren't looking as good as you'd like. I've heard reports of hummingbirds in the area. Usually they don't come until about the 1st of May, but having heard reports that they are already about, I thought I'd put out my Hummingbird Feeder. In the Hummingbird Feeder, I have a mixture of sugar and water. You do not need red color. In fact, red color is poison to them. So I urge you not to use it. But I use 2 cups of water and a ½ cup sugar. It's a 4 to 1, 4 parts water to 1 part sugar. I boil the water just to make sure it's pure. Many people just mix the sugar and water until it dissolves. And this will provide food for the hummingbirds as they come back. Your bird houses should already be up and ready for occupancy. I have one in back that I think has some bluebirds in it. So they are probably the earliest to nest, and they nest as early as the first part of April or even into March. They're already raising their children. So the other thing is to enjoy the garden. Everything's popping up, all your old friends, perennials that you've had for a number of years. And some of them have gotten very large and need to be divided. And that's what I'll be doing in the next couple of weeks. Digging out some for the Garden Club plant sale, which will be in May. And being able to share them with others. Know that all of these bulbs will be gone, foliage and all, before the end of summer. They will all die back. So you need to make plans to have those areas filled. The peonies and poppies, this is a poppy, an oriental poppy. It's up, and again, I will put a support on that. Next to it is an interesting little plant. I have a couple of these. They're called Pulsata, and they're kind of an interesting little spring plant. And this one is in full bloom at the moment among the grape hyacinths. It has a red flower, and it has very fuzzy foliage. And once it finishes blooming, it has a very fuzzy little seed pod. It's kind of interesting in the garden. So it's one of the more unusual plants I have. Another peony, and you can see this one probably gets a little more sun or got cleared out from leaves a little sooner. And this one is already well into the support that I put around it. More tulips and more daffodils. I love them, and I will be putting more of my little rocks around to see where I can plant some more to really fill this garden up every spring. Tulips don't live forever. You have to replant those every once in a while. But daffodils will last for years and years. So they're a good bet for your money. Now let's go over to the vegetable garden. Lots is happening there too. The brush has been burned and the garden has been rototilled. This was accomplished a little earlier than usual. But often this part of the garden I like to get planted early. I'm even a little late on planting my peas and spinach. But one of the things that I did do is start some spinach sets first inside, and then I moved them out to my shed. So it's time to transplant these into the garden. And I can put one about every 6 inches, and that's what I'm going to do. And I'll just do a few right now so you can see the procedure. What I did is I tied a string between 2 garden stakes and marked where I want to put these. And then I'm just going to try to carefully get them out, which is sometimes easier said than done. And put them in about every 6 inches. Spinach likes it cool, and it doesn't like it when the weather gets really hot. So we want to get it out either with seed or starts before the weather gets really hot. Oops. So I'll just continue until I've planted all the spinach. And of course, once it's in the ground, give it a good drink to settle it in. This year, I ordered new strawberries. Strawberries last for about 4 or 5 years, giving good crops. And I did leave an area with about 2 feet of, or 2-foot row, wide row of the old strawberries. But this is what they look like when they arrive. They look rather sad. And I'm going to plant these about every 8 or 9 inches. And to plant a strawberry, you need to dig a hole and then make a little mound in the middle with your fingers and open up those roots. And you want the soil to come right about here on the strawberry when you have it in. If it's too deep or not deep enough, it won't make it. So we hope we have them at the correct depth. And I have another one to put here. I saved 3. I've already done the majority of the row. If you order strawberries and don't have time to plant them right away, you need to keep them in the refrigerator. Until you get out and plant them. And there we are. The remaining 3 berries, a few rocks to be gotten out of the garden. And again, a good soaking. Any plant that goes in gets watered well so that it doesn't dry out. The next thing that I can plant now, incidentally, I could also put in spinach seeds. They would be good to plant, or chard, or carrots, lettuce. Any of these early vegetables can now be planted. And I'll be doing that over the next week or 2. The other thing is onion sets. And I got some onion sets, and I made a little trench. And these I'm just going to poke in. You can see what's the top from the bottom. And you put them in about roots down. I plant these close so that I can pick some of them for scallions and leave the rest for onions. Got that one upside down. And I poke them into my little trench and then cover them. And that's all there is to planting onion sets. They'll come up very shortly, and I don't need to water those right now. We have some rain expected. If there wasn't rain coming, I would probably water them. The other thing I've planted are peas, and I plant 3 kinds. And I've already started by planting some snow peas, which are the ones that you eat just the pod, some snap peas, where you eat the pod and the pea, and these that I'm planting right now are called shell peas because you have to shell them in order to consume them. You don't eat the pod on these. Once these are up, I will put up a fence to hold them. They need some support, but I plant fairly close with these, and I do better spacing seed without gloves and then putting them on to cover. Some years I've added nitrogen fixing bacteria. It's something you do need to get every year, and I neglected to get it this year. So they're probably not going to, if I find it, I can sprinkle it on top of the row. It helps the peas fix nitrogen in the soil. But I think they'll grow just fine without it too. And then we cover them up and pat it down. I plant them fairly close together. Sometimes the birds will pluck at them as they come up, so I want to make sure that I have enough for me too. These get covered about 3 times their size, or perhaps a little more. My soil is fairly light. If it were heavier, I might not cover them much more than 3 times their depth. But there we have the peas planted. This is the early garden, and again, I can move on and plant carrots, lettuce, chard, arugula, all those nice spring greens that we're so hungry for after a long winter. This is my row of strawberries that I saved. This will be kept here until I've been able to harvest hopefully a few berries, because the new row of berries, unfortunately, in order to get them to really take well, you need to remove all of the blossoms the first year. Therefore, those will not produce a thing this year, but hopefully next year we will have a large crop. These are the leeks that we planted last fall in October, and they're doing really well. I did put some fertilizer on those, and I'll keep the straw around them, and they'll continue to grow to be harvested in about July. This parsley came up from last year's parsley. This is its 2nd year. Parsley that you buy at the store probably is in its 2nd year when you get it, especially if you get it at this time of the season. So it will possibly go to seed after a period of time. If you grow parsley from seed, however, it will come up the next year and you can pick it, and then it will go to, and then it will not go to seed, but it will come up the next year as long as you don't plow it up or pull it out. And I will have parsley here before that I plant from seed even thinks about coming up. I'll have plenty of parsley to use. This year, both my Italian parsley and curled parsley came up. Often the Italian parsley doesn't do quite as well. The other thing we have over here is rhubarb. And the rhubarb will be ready to pick pretty soon. We're getting some nice stalks in there. I'm going to let it get a little larger. That's what we fertilized last month. And it'll be ready soon to make some rhubarb things. So another thing to be harvested. Now let's move around and see what else we need to do as far as transplanting some things. My planters looked so empty this spring, so I filled them with pansies and some lettuce starts that I started inside, and a few of the red twig dogwood stems that I used for my holiday decorations as well. I've also filled my window box with the little violas. Actually, those are violas rather than pansies officially, but pansies are violas. So, and I put some lettuce in here and a start of kale, just to give it a little extra. We'll see what it does by next month. So I have some pansies and kale and lettuce in my window boxes. And I may decide to put more lettuce in the window boxes. The other thing I need to do is, we had started the impatiens inside back in, was it February or March? At any rate, they are ready. They need to go into a bigger pot, each one. So I have my transplant soil here, potting soil, and I'm going to be putting them in larger pots. And this particular potting setup has a little wick at the bottom that you can water, and it will hold the water for at least a little while. And these have been getting watered through and you see it's a nice little start there, and I'll put that in and then add more of the potting soil. around it and tamp it down. And then when I'm finished filling this pot, I will take it back inside. It is too early to put impatiens outside. It's too cold. It's possible it's going to get colder. Today is a nice day. They could stay out today. But by Thursday, the temperature is only going to be 50 for a high. So we don't want to put them out too soon. And this will give them a chance to get a little bushy. I can, again, take these center 2 leaves out of each one, and they will bush out and make a nice full plant. I'll continue doing this a little bit later. And now we can go in the backyard because there's also a shade garden to be worked on. I'm in the shade garden, and the hostas are starting to come up. A lot of people have hostas, they come in various shades of green, gold, white edges, gold centers. There's a lot of different varieties. They can be very large or very small. But one thing they have in common is that they are dessert for deer and also for slugs. So if you grow hostas, you need to take some precautions. It's hard to see them. They come up. This one is a hosta called June, which is one of my favorites. And it's coming up as these little purple shoots coming out. And I'm going to add some composted manure around it. They also are quite hungry. They like some compost or manure around each one. And I can lightly mix it in. A little hard to do because it's very rooty in this area. But in order to keep the slugs away, I'm going to use a product called Slug Magic. And there used to be that the slug bait was very poisonous to pets. This one is not. It's safe for use. It's an iron product, iron phosphate, I believe. So it's safe around pets. I wouldn't feed it to them, but it's much safer. The other one was very poisonous. And so I just sprinkle a little of these pellets around each hosta after I've fertilized it, and it helps to keep the slugs off. And I'll have to repeat this. If I start to see any holes in the leaves, I'll repeat using this product. I do grow them amid other foliage, so the slugs are definitely in the area, but they will stay away from the hosta, and this will, if you start early, reduce the population considerably, and you'll be able to enjoy hosta that doesn't look like Swiss cheese. So I'll be using that quite a lot. As the hosta come up, there's another one over here. Again, I'll just sprinkle a little around it, and this will help a lot. The other thing you can do is set out saucers of beer, but if you have a dog that likes beer, that isn't going to help at all because the dog will drink all the beer before the slugs even get to it. So the saucer of beer trick really doesn't work well for me, but this does. If you don't have a dog, a little tuna fish can full of beer, the slugs will fall right in and drown. They will be very attracted to it. Now let's move back a little ways. The crocuses and snowdrops that we had last month are pretty much gone. Now we have a little scilla that is coming up here and there further back, and the hellebores are still in bloom and their leaves are starting to come up. I had taken all the old leaves off, and now new leaves are coming, and they will stay all summer. All of this grass-like foliage is crocus foliage, and it will disappear shortly at some point. The reason you know it's crocus foliage and not grass that's invaded, which it can do, is that each of the little spears of the crocus foliage has a white stripe down the middle. You have to look pretty close, but it is there. And so you'll know that you have crocuses and you need to leave them until they naturally die back. I have more hosta coming up here. Again, we treat it with the slug pellets. And other things, ferns and more hosta will be coming up as we go. Now back to the pond. On one of the nice days last weekend, Saturday, I was able to get my pond set up. Or I think it was Saturday before last actually. And we got the filter in, the tubing out, which I keep in the house, and the waterfall set up. And I've started adding the enzyme packets. They will float for a little bit and then they sink. And that's helped clear the water. And the water has cleared considerably. It was kind of a murky mess with those warm days that we had. But by having the enzymes activated, it helps to clear the water. And I'll add a packet every week or two as the summer goes on. I switch from a cool weather product to a warm weather product. And it just sinks to the bottom. There's also a tablet I can add if I feel there's a lot of sludge in the bottom, and that will help dissolve it. They're all natural products, organic, and I like to use those. They're safe for the fish, safe for people. Again, my dog drinks out of the pond occasionally. I don't want to use anything in it that would be bad for him. I'm using a spring and fall food. Once the water temperature reached 50 degrees, my fish got hungry. So I put in a little bit and they usually just come swimming right up. Eventually. Takes a while for them to figure out each year that you're feeding them. But I try to do it in the same spot. And they should come up and start getting some of it as it moves. Again, it's an easily digestible spring-fall mix. And the food is going to float around and they can come up and grab it. And they will. I have 6 fish and the 6 fish made it over the winter, just really nice. I've had some trouble with rabbits back here. And I have a grass right down at the base of the area here. Over here. And this has been just nibbled by rabbits. Usually I'm the one that prunes it, but the rabbits have pruned it. The deer spray is for deer and rabbits, but I don't find it works as well on my rabbits, so they didn't get the message. So I'm going to use a little dried blood. Dried blood is high in nitrogen, so it's good for the plants. And also the rabbits feel that there may have been a predator around, so they're less likely to nibble. So I'll keep sprinkling that around on some of these things that have obviously been eaten. And we've also seen the bunny out here, so we know he's here. And I would like him to stick with either the lawn or something else out in the woods. But dried blood can help in your animal gardening with animals. Put these back in the shed. And I'll be putting more things in the shed as the season goes on. I have one side is plexiglass and it faces south, so it gets a lot of sun. It will heat up during the day really well. Unfortunately, it also cools down at night, in which case I can't leave very tender plants out there all night. It will stay a couple of degrees warmer than the air temperature, and certainly it keeps the wind from blowing on the plants. But I don't put anything out until at least the 1st of May, or at most the end of April, before tender plants can go out there. Plants that are a little hardier can go out sooner, and that's where the spinach and the lettuce that I started early was for the last month. I only had to bring it in one night when the temperature got down to the 20s. Now let's go up by the patio and do a little outdoor lunch. It's a great day for a lunch or an early supper on the porch, and so I'm putting together a salad. I've already prepped the ingredients inside, but I'm going to make the salad dressing here. I have 2/3 cup olive oil, and I'm going to add 3 tablespoons of cider vinegar, one tablespoon of Dijon mustard, and 2 teaspoons of honey, should have dipped that in the oil a little bit first in order to coat it with oil. And I'm going to add 1.5 teaspoons of salt and 1/2 teaspoon of pepper, which I've already mixed. Here. And this is the dressing. This is called a chicken Waldorf salad because there is apple in it, but there's a lot of other things in it too. And this is the dressing we'll be using, and I'll just keep shaking that up, and I'm going to add that later when we eat the salad. It's always best to add your dressing a little later. But I want to add things, and I'm using spring mix. This recipe is one from the Barefoot Contessa, and I found it online, and I've modified it slightly. She used a combination of greens, 2 cups each. I'm using just the spring mix that you can get in the market right now, and that I'll hopefully have in the garden soon. To that, I'm going to add chicken, and I'm going to add about half of this. This was a breast of chicken, and I'm going to be serving 2 people, so I don't think I want all of it. And this has been cooked. You could use leftovers from a rotisserie chicken if you wanted to, or you could specifically cook the chicken the day that you wanted to serve the salad or the day before. Again, I'm using about 1/2 of some of these items. And this is bacon. This was a 1/2 pound of bacon, so I'm using about 1/4 pound of it. Again, I found out I'm feeding fewer people than I thought I was. And then we have cheddar cheese. And this is 6 ounces, and so we'll use about 3 ounces of the cheddar cheese. It's been grated. Pretty easy to put together, and it's pretty hearty with all the nice protein ingredients. And then we have nuts, and these are a mixture of cashews, Marcona almonds, and walnuts, and they've been toasted for 10 minutes in a 350-degree oven. And again, I'm going to use half because we're going to have the rest of the salad at another time. And white raisins. These are kind of unusual additions, but they make it really good. And again, we'll put those in. Something you don't see, I suspect you could add white grapes or the green grapes if you wished, but I kind of like the raisins. They added a lot to it. And then I'm going to toss this together, or attempt to. Mix it. Again, the unusual ingredients are what make it really special. But it is quite hearty. Nice for a spring day outdoors. And I keep getting some of it out. And then I'm going to top it with some hard-cooked eggs. Even more protein ingredients. Cut those in half and set them on it. And that's our salad. Now, right before serving, I'll add my dressing and an apple that is cut in half and cored and grated onto the salad and mixed in. The reason I don't do that right now is because the apple will turn brown, so you want to do it right before serving. So easy enough. We have a lovely salad, enough for 2 very generous servings, maybe a little left over. And then I made some scones, and this is a King Arthur recipe, and it's straight up the way they have it in their web page. And these are made with chives, bacon, and cheddar, so they kind of follow some of the theme of the salad. And of course, we also have a nice bouquet of daffodils from the garden. What could be better on a spring day? So there's our lunch in the garden. I thank you for joining me. I'm Liz Davey, and you've been watching A Walk in the Garden on Norfolk Community Cable, NCTV.